43 miles of waterfront, 7,500 acres of land. The Port of Los Angeles is the nation's premier gateway for international commerce, and I am delighted to be joined by its executive director, Eugene Soroka. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you, Maria.
All right. So, as the executive director of the Port of LA, you obviously knew early on that as the largest container port in North America, it would certainly play a huge role in this pandemic. And then in the first part of March, Mayor Garcetti also charged you with being chief logistics officer for the city. That's a whirlwind of activity in a very short period of time. What were your first thoughts and actions and strategies?
First thought was we had to get to work. We needed to assemble a team, put a process together, and act very swiftly to help our frontline medical workers and the hospitals that are serving our medically ill and COVID-19 patients. We've heard some really horrible stories of hospitals who are sending staff out to grocery stores to buy hefty bags because they can't get the isolation gowns. Folks that are using masks 4 and 5 times when they're meant to be disposable. So it's just gut-wrenching to hear these stories. Finding alternative manufacturing for the PPE was key. We did not want to step on the hospital's toes. We didn't want to push their priority down with their known manufacturers, so we went out and found others. We felt that a direct-to-manufacturer plan was the way to go. And then we were very fortunate. The Honeywell people were as interested as we were, and we were able to fashion this agreement for 24 million N95 NIOSH certified masks.
All right, so now you have this contract over a period of 2 years for these 24 million. How is that coming about? And when's the first delivery?
Our first delivery of 100,000 masks is due by the end of this month, by May 31st. And they'll slowly ramp up production to a peak of 1.2 million units beginning in November. Part of what the mayor's vision was, using this great port of Los Angeles and LAX airport, could we find a way to really move this product through our 2 great assets here in Los Angeles?
So prior to this moment, or currently in this moment, have a lot of the PPEs been offshore and not domestic? And is the pendulum sort of shifting into more domestic-based manufacturing?
Yeah, I think you're starting to see a shift, Maria, but it was interesting. A number of outlets in mainstream media have reported the amount of PPE that was shipped overseas at a time where many thought we should be preparing here on the ground with our hospitals, doctors, nurses, and technicians. There was one article that described 280 million units of these supplies were shipped in one day out of the United States to overseas markets. The foresight was limited. So I think we've seen a retraction of that, the inability to get products in from overseas as quickly as we needed when there was a paucity of product on the ground was also an eye-opening experience for many. We wanted to build a stockpile right here in Los Angeles, and we're beginning to do just that. There will be a day that we curb and then eradicate this virus, but for the time being, it has great historical value to us. Here in San Pedro during World War II, we were building Victory-class ships for the U.S. Navy. And today, as we battle towards victory against this virus, it brings to mind the successes and all the hard work that went into the last rendition of this victory campaign. And we have a great deal of pride in our history at the Port of Los Angeles, and that gives some of us in this generation great momentum to move forward. When the mayor asked us to take on this logistics role, we basically started up a new city department within 7 days. We put a procurement plan together in about 48 hours while studying the market and seemingly learning by the hour about the nuanced effect of the medical supply chain. When we put everybody together on the ground, not a lot of us knew this medical supply chain, but we all studied, pored over books, read on the internet, learned. More importantly, we talked to the medical experts and those in the supply chain. Mats Feinberg is one guy over at Kaiser that tried to coach us up early on what to look for, what to look out for at the same time.
The efficiency of all of this is almost mind-boggling. Are you stunned by how fast government moved?
I came from the private sector, and it's not surprising based on the talent that we assembled, the willingness and the vision of this mayor, who we all look up to. And in times of crisis like this, we need strong leadership, and I don't think there is any doubt that Mayor Eric Garcetti is just that leader.
And I hope these public-private partnerships will continue after this crisis is over, I would hope.
Yeah, we see 3 phases right now, Maria. One is where we sit today, and that's a triage phase. We're doing everything we can to get supplies to the front line, like many others are doing right now, too. Second, as we begin to see this illness curbed, we'll have just a moment to catch our breath and then start the replenishment process. We've heard most of the hospitals say they want to get back to a safety stock level or a level of inventory that makes their medical experts feel more comfortable, obviously, than they do today. Once we get our legs back under us, then it's time to fix this medical supply chain. And I think what the city and the port are doing right now by bringing information technology, PO-level data, and the ability to share that information so we see not only the demand signals, but how we can supply quicker and fill gaps will be a real difference maker in the future.
The port being such a critical part of commerce internationally, globally, and locally, I'm sure you've seen some adjustments taking place before even the pandemic hit, obviously.
I lived in China during SARS. I saw firsthand what a viral epidemic looks like, and this will probably be 10 to 15 times greater than what we witnessed during SARS. And without the important preparedness we're seeing now, we have got a long way to go.
Let's kind of jump back a little bit to those that have been affected by the pandemic. What's happening with your employees?
The employee base of 905 people are on the job and working, including also construction and maintenance and construction crews that are out on the job every day. So about half of our workforce is out in the field, day in and day out. They're managing themselves by physical distancing, following Los Angeles Health County Services, as well as the Centers for Disease Control and other medical expert advice every day on the job, to and from, and with their families. The other half of the group is mostly telecommuting. We've also given some time to take care of elderly parents, young kids who are out of school with no daycare opportunities. So we're trying to be as sensitive as we can to those groups as well.
Who has felt the most dramatic challenge and pain from what has happened with this entire global pandemic that you've seen from the port perspective?
Right. I think it's hard to single out any one group because we've all felt the pain economically, physically, and mentally in different ways. But our longshore groups, our truck drivers, our other union-affiliated members who do work right here at the port have all seen this downturn and closure of the economy affect their jobs. And to put it very simply, less cargo means fewer jobs.
Right.
Our business through the first 4 months of this year is down about 15%. Our shift work for longshore labor is edging out in front of that just a little bit, down 18% year over year. And every job is painful. That's not happening on these docks today. It impacts our kids, our families, the schooling, putting food on the table. It's painful for this harbor enclave because this is a company town. And the company is this Port of Los Angeles that everybody works towards, whether you own a restaurant, a small shop, the dry cleaners, or you work right out there on the docks. 1 in 9 jobs today in Southern California, our 5-county area, 1 in 9 jobs, or more than 1 million people go to work every day with a job related to this port complex. So as this port goes, so does the economic value of this Southern California region.
Let's end on a positive note. You are a forward-thinking person. You have definitely incorporated things at the port that were very advanced. I'm sure that you have some hope for what is going to play out.
I absolutely do. And I think this is the greatest port on the face of the earth. The engineering marvel that we see today was planned over 113 years. I think it's an opportunity for us to reinvent ourselves. Some things you cannot manage. But what we can do is look forward to how we are going to better respond to global needs and our supply chain partners.
Well, Godspeed. And it was really wonderful to speak with you.
Great to see you too, Maria.
For those Angelenos who are suffering from mental illness and addiction, the COVID-19 crisis has the potential for being especially challenging. But thanks to a relatively new phone application, getting treatment is now a whole lot easier. Now, Dr. Tony Greco is our guest today. He is a psychologist, and he is also a founder of the company called Get Help, which developed the app. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Greco.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us why and how this application was designed and what it is designed to do.
As a clinical psychologist being out in the field trying to find help for people, it's very difficult to locate resources. And the real problem is that there is not a connective communication between all the different service providers that are out there that are trying to provide help to people, whether it's a sober living house or a treatment provider or a homeless shelter. And there's no way for them to communicate their availability in real time to all of the different people on the other end who are looking for those services, whether that be a mother who's looking for help for a child, all the way to therapists or first responders who are looking for help on a daily basis. What Get Help does is connect these people together and create an ecosystem so that everybody can share their information and find information at the same time.
Now, for the past few years, you've had a pilot contract with the city. Tell us all about it.
We were very fortunate early on to be able to start an initial pilot program with the Los Angeles Police Department HOPE officers. The HOPE officers are those officers who are specifically trained to work in the field and engage with people experiencing homelessness and provide them with services and opportunities to find either a bed, food pantry, or laundry service, or whatever service it is that they may need. What we did during the pilot program was we went on many ride-alongs. We got to actually go out there in the field and we got to see what kind of services do these HOPE officers need? What are they looking for on a regular basis? And through that pilot program, what we saw was that there were oftentimes up to 6 points of engagement with someone experiencing homelessness before they would even consider taking a shelter bed. So oftentimes that was first looking for a meal, a place to do their laundry, a place to take a shower, before they built up the trust in order to be able to accept going to a shelter bed. Also found with the officers who were using the app in the field was that it started to create this relationship with people that were experiencing homelessness, where they saw the outreach worker, they saw the officer as someone who was there to help them, to provide them with a tool.
How were they finding these resources before your app?
Phone lists. And a lot of times these are paper phone lists that haven't been updated. Sometimes the number isn't any good anymore, or you have a couple people that you call and see or hope that they have a bed available and wait for a phone call back.
So how has this helped you in terms of understanding the needs of the community in developing, your app?
What we really need is to know if that shelter down the street has a bed available so that if we send them there, they're going to be able to get in. And so what we discovered through that process was that we also needed to give those shelters, those treatment programs, the ability to be able to communicate that information. So it's a two-way street, right? And what we really have to create is a marketplace, if you will, to be able to let them communicate with one another.
Now, let's talk about the COVID-19 crisis. Now, I know, looking at your website, you have some information, of course, about mental illness and addiction. What about COVID-19?
Mayor Garcetti's mass shelter expansion program set up emergency shelters in the rec and parks, and we've been able to work with rec and parks specifically in being able to manage those shelter beds. Prior to using Get Help, they would have to manually count beds every hour, right? And then be able to feed that into a sheet, and then all of that get compiled by the mayor's office to go into the mayor's dashboard. Using our system, they've been able to bring a resident into one of the shelters, and then it updates all of that information automatically and then goes directly into the mayor's dashboard. What this also does is it gives the outreach workers that instantaneous availability so they know where to direct someone to the appropriate shelter. And as a result of using this system, what we've seen are occupancy rates over 75 and 80% at the shelters because they're able to manage those beds more effectively. Right now, what research is telling us is that for every additional 1% of unemployment, there's a 3 to 3.5% increase in opioid overdoses. What the predictions are telling us is that we're looking at 25% unemployment, as a result of the COVID-19, as a result of the coronavirus. So what is that going to do to our mental health system? Right? What is that going to do to people who are already struggling? A system that is already struggling to keep up with the demand, and a breakdown in access to services. So if there's already been problems accessing services, what's going to happen when there's even more people trying to access those services, right? And that's where we come in, right? That's where we come in, is to be able to give those people the direct tools that they need to be able to increase their access to services.
The issues of addiction and homelessness are very real for you. You have a very personal story. Tell us about it. How did it begin?
My mom and dad met in an AA meeting, and my mom didn't stay sober. So, I have been saying for a long time, I've been trying to get people into treatment since I was 7 years old. My dad has unfortunately suffered from mental illness all of my life. As a result of my parents' mental illness and addiction issues, I myself experienced homelessness at 15 years old. I know what it's like to not know where you're going to sleep at night. So when I talk to people who are in the streets, who are afraid to go into a homeless shelter because what are they going to do with their stuff? Where are they going to store their things? I remember what it's like being 17, and do you take this thing or do you take that? And you only have room for one, right? I was fortunate to get help. I was fortunate enough to be able to find help from people and to rely on the generosity and the help of strangers, right? And as a result of that, I was able to learn how to do things like go to school and get an education, right? And slowly but surely work my way through school. Always with the idea that that one day I'd be in that position to be able to know where that bed was when my mom would finally call one day and ask me for help. When my sister would finally call one day and ask for help. And that was my goal. That was my goal in life, and it was my goal in founding Get Help, and it's the goal and the focus for me on a daily basis, every day of my life now. That's what I'm thinking about.
Dr. Greco, it seems as though your app would be great for other disasters, to be used in other sorts of situations like hurricanes, floods, what have you.
Exactly. We're already having conversations based on our success with the Rec and Parks and emergency management in the city of Los Angeles about being able to use this tool in the event of an earthquake or a fire when they have to set up emergency shelters. But what's more imminent right now is that we're going into hurricane season. And so we are having conversations with people in various states about the traditional model of managing shelters is not going to work.
Now, on your website, you're asking people to join in your effort. So what do you mean by that?
Well, there's a lot of ways to join in the effort, right? If you're a service provider, if you are providing treatment, then get involved. Start using our technology. Start reaching out to us. Start updating your information. If you're a professional who's looking for services, download the app, right? Start using it. Let us know what you think about it, right? We want to hear from you. And the more people that get engaged, the more effective it becomes, right? This is a network. This is an ecosystem that we're creating.
Thank you so much for your time and for everything that you do. Dr. Tony Greco, the founder of Get Help, the app.
Welcome to LA Currents. I'm Rasha Goel. We are excited today to talk to Justin Brooks, a criminal defense lawyer and law professor who is well known for his work freeing innocent people from prison.
home, baby girl. I am home. Justin is right here. He's right here.
He's not lying. We're heading home and this nightmare is over.
He is the founder and director of the California Innocence Project. Welcome, Justin, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
What inspired you to start this project, and tell us a little bit more about it?
I was living in Michigan and I was teaching law school, and I read an article in the newspaper about a 21-year-old woman who was sentenced to death on a plea bargain. And I didn't understand how someone could get a death sentence on a plea bargain. So I met with her to talk about it, and she told me not only was she sentenced to death without any trial, but that she was innocent and that her lawyer had told her to plea out. And so I went back to the law school where I was teaching. I told my students that story, that there's a woman on death row. She says she's innocent. She's going to be executed. Who wants to help me out with this case? And we started investigating it and found out she was, in fact, factually innocent.
Wow.
And that case inspired me to start the California Innocence Project with the idea that I would work on real cases with law students to teach them how to be great lawyers while at the same time helping innocent people in prison.
And you were able to save her life in time?
So I was able to get her death sentence reversed. The sad part of the story is 25 years later, I'm still working on the case to get her out of prison.
So 95%, I read that 95% cases in the U.S. are plea bargains,
Yep.
which means that many people are basically just pleading guilty to crimes they didn't commit. How can we change that?
So what's happened over the last 30 years is as we've increased sentences and had mandatory minimums and 3 strikes, the prosecutors put on the table such severe potential punishments that people feel they can't take the risk of going to trial. There's been a push towards more and more plea bargains. Now, I'm not naive. I know that the majority of those people are guilty. But the problem is that whether you're guilty or innocent isn't relevant when you're facing a tremendous possible sentence if you go to trial and the possibility of a lesser sentence if you don't. That's why the story of Brian Banks was so important to me, and that's why we pushed to have it made into a feature film.
Brian Banks was 16 years old when he was accused of a crime he did not commit. He lost 11 years, scholarship. He was prevented from playing football. The system is broken. We have 10 months to clear his name.
The statement by the alleged victim was false.
So they just based it on her statement completely.
Absolutely. It's as simple as one person tells a lie, and then the system will chew you up. So unless she'd come forward, there was no way to win that case.
We believed the recantations of the witness. We do not believe Mr. Banks did the crime that he pled guilty to, and therefore justice has been served.
Let's talk about wrongful convictions. What are some of the causes of wrongful convictions?
The leading cause at trial for wrongful convictions was bad identifications. And we found out that people are not good at making IDs, yet jurors treat that as very powerful evidence. When someone walks in court and says, I'm 100% sure that's the person who did it, that's enough to get you convicted. But when you look at the science behind IDs, there are so many problems. For example, almost half the people I've walked out of prison were convicted on a cross-racial identification. That is a huge problem in Southern California because we have every type of race, and it's always a Mexican person IDing a white person, a black person, a black person, a white person. And our ability to identify faces is formed in the first 5 years of our life. And if everyone in your family is the same race, you actually, for the rest of your life, will have difficulty identifying other races. And there's all scientific studies about this. I see cases where they make the ID 6 months later, and it was a dark night, and that's why they're almost always wrong. It literally is process. I was down in Georgia a few years ago, and I thought I'd seen it all, and I'm in this town where they have a concrete building in the middle of a field. They have a row of all African-American men who are walking in, and one by one, they're walking in front of the judge, meeting their lawyer for the first time, negotiating a deal with the DA, and getting sentenced. And no one's even ever met with them to talk about anything.
Wow. And you're given that certain amount of time, basically. I mean, you're having to make a decision in those few minutes that you're interacting with these people.
It's becoming a factory. The justice system is becoming a factory. Innocent people sometimes confess. And I've looked at a lot of these cases, and sometimes it's as simple as you've been interrogated for 13, 14 hours, you're tired of it, and you just say, okay, I did it. What do you need me to sign? And they're just angry and they sign it.
Such a shame.
And they're thinking, you're not going to convict me of this because I didn't do it. And now that person goes to prison for the rest of their life. That's very, very common.
I'm factually innocent. I'm actually factually innocent. This can happen to anybody.
One of my clients who we got released was Kimberly Long in Riverside, a white middle-class nurse who came home and found her boyfriend beaten to death. And unfortunately, she'd been in an argument earlier in the day at a bar where people witnessed that, and then she became a suspect, and then very poor police work was done, and she got convicted. So it can happen to anybody, and that's something I think people need to think about.
On a personal level, how do you take all this in? Because I can only imagine how difficult it is. I mean, of course you're a lawyer, but when you're constantly dealing with these cases where it's a yes, no, maybe if, how are you taking and processing all this for yourself?
I mean, I think I do an okay job of it, but not always. I don't sleep very well. I try to exercise a lot. I go on very, very long walks.
It's not just the California Innocence Project who believes Michael Handline is innocent. A federal magistrate who reviewed all of the evidence in the case, spent years looking at the case, said that Michael Handline's conviction should be reversed.
I'm so intrigued by you as a person because you've not just kept this here in California or nationally, you've actually taken this program abroad and internationally. You've created a project called the Red Innocente, which is in Latin America, which also helps the wrongfully accused. You've helped people in Nicaragua and Qatar. So talk to me about how your movement is really making a global impact.
Sure. So when I started this work, there were a handful of us doing it in the world. We had our first meeting in Chicago. We all shared a pizza and sat in one living room. We have a meeting coming up next month of all the Innocence workers, and we have 1,200 people coming to it. So we went from a few small organizations a couple of decades ago to now we have 60 in the United States. We have a ton in Europe and Asia, and I've started all the projects in Latin America. Yeah, it's become a global movement. And the reason is because there's innocent people in prison in every country in the world. There's no perfect system.
If there's something that you could share with the audiences today or something that you'd want them to know, what is one thing that you'd like to share with them or tell them?
Politicians have used fear to get us to pass a whole lot of laws that don't make sense. And if you're ever serving on a jury, really try to set aside your own biases that we all have and try to see what is the evidence in this case. And does that meet the burden of proof?
Oh, I love that.
Even though I've been doing this kind of work for 25 years, I still have no idea what it's like to be one of my clients.
Before we close out here, is there a website that people can go to find out more about the
Please go to CaliforniaInnocenceProject.org. Of course, we'd love people's support. We have to raise money to work on these cases.
Thank you so much, Justin. And thank you for joining us for another episode of LA Currents.